blinking cursor, a wall of scrolling logs, and a red banner that shouldn't be there. The alert isn't noisy, it's pitiless. In a quiet Boeing operations room, engineers watch permissions spike in a network segment that's supposed to be boring. Catalog databases, parts ordering, distribution telemetry, then a connection that looks like an admin, but not one of ours, creates a session through a gateway product everyone in the industry uses. Another window opens, a directory listing with file names that smell like lifeblood. Citrix logs, email backup archives, provisioning scripts, audit trails. No one is shouting yet, but the oxygen has changed. A timer appears on the dark web, because that's how the modern stick-up works. Pay or your crown jewels, whatever the attackers manage to scrape, go public. This is the Boeing ransomware incident that breaks across the news cycle in late 2023 and boils over into 2024, a breach that doesn't need to halt planes in midair, but still manages to puncture the mythology of invulnerability around one of the most consequential manufacturers on Earth. It is not the first time a headline says aerospace giant hit by cybercriminals, and it won't be the last. But the combination here, global supply chain gravity, defense and commercial footprints, a ruthless extortion crew, turns a single environment compromise into a masterclass on how modern ransomware groups operate, where they hunt and why not flight safety doesn't equal no impact. Tonight, we stay in the room and on the wire as the incident unfolds. We're going to move in present tense, because that has how it feels to everyone who has ever had to run point on a breach. Triage, contain, communicate, and then only after the smoke starts to lift, analyze. We'll track how the threat actors get in, what they take, what they demand, and how defenders respond. We'll unpack the exploit chain, the tooling, the data types, and the choices, both technical and leadership, that shape the blast radius. Then we'll slow the tempo, put on the forensic gloves, and follow the evidence to the broader trends shaping 2024 and beyond. Double extortion, edge device exploitation, and the expanding theater of supply chain pressure. If you work incidents, you already know the sound design, a soft room tone, the periodic clack of a mechanical keyboard, the dry cough of a SIAM alert. If you don't, by the end of this episode, you'll understand why the incident commander Ibrahim's voice goes flat when they say, "This did not affect flight safety." That sentence is true. It's also not the whole story, and in cybersecurity, the rest of the story is where the lessons live. Start with the target. Boeing is not just an aircraft manufacturer. It is a global ecosystem. Commercial jets, defense systems, space vehicles, and the enormous aftermarket world of parts, manuals, and maintenance. That last piece, distribution, is the circulatory system for airlines and maintenance, repair, and overhaul shops worldwide. It is where a mechanic gets the authorized replacement for a hydraulic pump, and where a carrier validates that the new avionics module is tracked, documented, and compliant. If a malicious actor can tug on that thread, they don't have to touch a flight deck to create turbulence. They can throttle supply, sow uncertainty, or grind an operation by targeting logistics and trust. Now the adversary. The group in the headlines is LockBit, a ransomware as a service franchise that, by the early to mid-2020s, becomes one of the most widely deployed extortion platforms in the world. Think of LockBit less as a single gang and more as a franchise framework. A core crew maintains the codebase, the playbooks, the leak site marketing machine, while a rotating cast of affiliates, contractors in the underground, execute intrusions and split the profits. In this model, two things are optimized: scale and specialization. The core team keeps the crypto and the infrastructure slick. Affiliates refine initial access and lateral movement per victim vertical. That means when you see a LockBit label on an incident, the tactics can vary, but the business logic, steal, encrypt, extort, leak, is depressingly consistent. The context in late 2023 heading into 2024 is also critical. Attackers aren't just emailing macros or spearphishing VPN passwords anymore. They are going upstream to the connective tissue we bolt onto our networks to make work possible. Edge devices, load balancers, application delivery controllers, remote access gateways sit in that dangerous zone between outside and inside. When critical vulnerabilities drop for these devices, there's a gold rush, and one flaw dominates the chatter: Citrix bleed, a session handling issue in certain Citrix NetScaler deployments that, if unpatched, allows bad actors to hijack authenticated sessions and step through the front door without ever touching a password prompt. Defenders warn vendors release patches, government agencies publish advisories, and the cat and mouse resumes. In this climate, the front door is sometimes an API call. Why it matters in Boeing's case isn't just the brand or even the sector. It is the proof that the attack surface is where we do business. The portals where customers log in, the distribution systems partners depend on, the infrastructure that never sleeps. For global manufacturers, the crown jewels aren't always in R&D vaults. Sometimes they're sitting in the quiet, transactional systems that ensure an airline gets an actuator on Tuesday, so a plane can push back on Wednesday. A compromise there changes supplier behavior. It introduces friction. It adds paperwork. And in a world where time equals money and in aviation, regulation and safety are braided together, that friction is a weapon. Late October 2023, the internet rumor mill starts to whisper. LockBit has put Boeing on its leak site. With a countdown timer and a familiar message, contact us or we publish. Inside Boeing, security teams dig. Publicly, the line is careful. There's an incident affecting elements of the parts and distribution business, but flight safety is unaffected. In the background, responders isolate the affected environment and begin to trace access paths. On the leak site, the timer keeps ticking. The implication is blunt. The intruders claim to hold a tremendous amount of data. Deadline, early November. November suit arrives and passes. LockBit plays its next card. Within days, they post what they say is an initial trove of files. Journalists and researchers scan file names, Citrix logs, email backups, provisioning services, audits, security controls, with timestamps deep into October. It looks exactly like the sort of system-level documentation an affiliate would grab during discovery. The map of the castle, not the crown itself. Reuters reports that data has been published. Security outlets tally roughly 43 to 45 gigabytes. That is not a company, S entire nervous system, but it is more than a calling card. It's enough for copycats and extortionists to pan for gold. November 2023 continues with a twist many defenders dread. A formal government advisory appears, and it includes a detail that narrows the window. US and allied cybersecurity agencies warn that LockBit 3.0 affiliates are actively exploiting CVE 2023-4966 Citrix bleed to obtain initial access at multiple orgs. In one example delivered by a significant US manufacturer, the entry point was a Citrix appliance supporting a separate parts and distribution network. That manufacturer's description matches what Boeing has publicly said. The incident touches a distinct environment for distribution, not the flight systems for aircraft. The advisory functions as both community warning and a breadcrumb, confirming the exploit vector. Through December 2023 into January 2024, the public-facing narrative enters the slow drip phase. Boeing continues to coordinate with law enforcement and regulators. The attackers continue to posture on their leak site, which is how these things are marketed. And in January, summaries appear that say the stolen data has been published following ransom demands that weren't met. The important nuance here, not all data breaches are equal. Publication of exfiltrated data is the second blade in the double extortion scissors. Even if an enterprise restores operations, it still faces the longer tail of data exposure, credential recycling attempts, supplier emails leveraging leaked metadata, and the reputational sting of sensitive file names living forever on mirrored leak forums. Then in May 2024, a crisp figure drops into the record. Asked directly, Boeing confirms that the LockBit crew attempted to extort the company for roughly $200 million in the October attack window. It is a staggering number but not an outlier. For whale victims, affiliates aim high because the probability of a negotiated middle is embedded in the business model. The disclosure doesn't mean Boeing paid. It means the ask was that large. Whether a company pays or not, a ransom demand of that magnitude is designed to dominate internal risk discussions, insurance considerations, and board briefings. It also turns the incident into a benchmark for other attackers who watch and learn what the market will bear. By mid-2024, the external theater quiets, but the internal theater doesn't. Notifications, audits, control reviews, and tabletop recalibration exercises continue. The regulatory and litigation tales, which aren't front-page drama, become the day-to-day reality. Meanwhile, in the broader ecosystem, law enforcement pressure mounts against the LockBit brand, with periodic disruptions and takedowns that dent, but do not erase the affiliate economy. And on the defender side, patching and mitigation for Citrix Bleed and its cousins push forward, but so does attacker innovation. The Boeing incident settles into that uncomfortable space between contained and never really over, which is where most big breaches live. To reconstruct the likely attack chain, start at the edge. Citrix Bleed, CVE 2223-4966, is a flaw in certain Citrix NetScaler ADC gateway builds that mishandled session tokens. In practical terms, here's the horror. An attacker can, under certain conditions, pull valid session tokens from memory and then replay those tokens to impersonate authenticated users, often admins, without ever seeing or cracking a password. It's passwordless in the worst way. Because these appliances often sit internet-facing to broker remote access and deliver applications, exploitation is noisy in the community, but quiet in a single target S-logs, especially if you are not collecting the right telemetry at the appliance layer. Once an affiliate lands a valid session, the rest of the playbook looks like a standard modern intrusion. Enumerate, dump, pivot. Inside a parts and distribution environment, what do you enumerate first? Identity, storage, and orchestration. Affiliates target Active Directory not because it's fashionable, but because it's the control plane. If the Citrix appliance was bound to an AD realm with privileged service accounts, token abuse can translate into domain reconnaissance. Next stop, file servers and backup repositories. Why? Because double extortion works best when you can both encrypt the data to degrade availability and prove you stole enough to harm confidentiality. That is why the leaked file names from the Boeing incident matter even if you never open a single archive. Email backups, provisioning services, audit controls. Those represent documentation gold, and they are the scaffolding for future social engineering and forensics-resistant persistence. From there, tooling. LockBit 3.0 affiliates deploy a mixture of off-the-shelf and bespoke utilities, living off the land binaries, lol bins to move laterally without tripping heuristic alarms. PowerShell for orchestration, rclone or similar for exfiltration to cloud buckets. Credential harvesting with Mimikatz-like functionality or LSASS scraping, if they get that far. Some affiliates bring in commercially available remote administration tools to blend in. Encryption tends to be the final act, not the opening note, because once you light the ransomware fuse, blue teams pivot to lockdown mode. The smarter play is to spend longer in the discovery and staging phase, bleeding small data sets to test egress rules and then staging the big exfil job during a maintenance window. By the time you see the ransom banner, the real damage, data loss, has already happened. A crucial technical nuance in this case is segmentation. Boeing's public description emphasizes a separate environment for parts and distribution. In security architecture terms, that implies either a distinct AD forest, a separate identity provider, or at least hardened VLANs and ACLs with cross-domain controls. Segmentation is why the incident did not spill over into flight safety systems. But segmentation is only as strong as the holes you punch in it for business reasons. VPN bridges, data synchronization jobs, shared update servers, and shared identity providers can create wormholes between separate and reachable. Understanding whether the attackers could pivot across those wormholes and how quickly defenders close them is central to measuring what we call blast radius. Another lesson sits at the logging layer. Many enterprises log richly at the server OS and application level, but go thin on edge appliances. When a vulnerability like Citrix Bleed appears, gap-heavy logging becomes a liability. You need the ability to answer, on demand and retroactively, which sessions were live during the vulnerable window, which IPs pulled what routes, and which tokens were harvested and replayed. You also need encrypted packet capture or, failing that, proxy logs to map egress from internal hosts to the exfil endpoints. Without this, incident response becomes archaeology, painstaking and precise but slow. The longer the dwell time, the greater the confidence attackers have in their exfil stash and the more convincing their leak site screenshots become. Let's talk ransom economics. The $200 million demand reported in spring 2024 is in line with a tactic: anchor the ask at an eye-watering level to reframe internal decision trees. At those numbers, paying isn't a line item. It's an existential board decision that implicates legal, regulatory, and ethical frameworks. The extortion calculus also intersects with cyber insurance. Policies often include clauses around paying ransoms, notifications, and forensics vendor selection. Attackers know this. The double extortion model, Encrypt plus exfiltrate exploits the asymmetry. Even if you have immaculate backups and can restore, the data theft keeps the pressure on. For defense contractors and manufacturers, the data in question may include supplier agreements, network maps, and security artifacts that increase future risk. If you give in, you may buy a pinky promise that the data will be deleted. But the market has learned, brutally, that promises on tour are not warranties. Finally, consider the advisory choreography. When a high-profile victim collaborates with federal agencies to publish indicators of compromise, IOCs, and TTPs, the community benefits, but the victim also paints a target on their back in the criminal gossip channels. Affiliates bicker about which crew really did the work. Rivals probe for copycat opportunities. The defensive upside, rapid patching, increased detection fidelity, and hardening across an entire sector, usually outweighs the reputational sting. In the Boeing case, the advisory tying LockBit 3.0 affiliates to Citrix bleed and explicitly citing an incident that matched parts and distribution provided a smoking gun for defenders everywhere to refocus on edge appliance session hygiene. The most immediate impact is operational anxiety across the aviation supply chain. If you're an airline maintenance chief, you ask two questions. Did my access to the Boeing distribution portal remain intact? And did anything in the ordering, licensing, or documentation flow get altered? Even with no evidence of data tampering, the mere possibility forces checks. That slows everything. Orders are revalidated, shipments double-checked, and procurement teams ask for written assurances they didn't need yesterday. For Boeing, the support load spikes. More tickets, more calls, more time to reassure customers that the integrity of parts logistics is intact. Even without a single delayed flight attributable to the breach, the administrative drag is real. And in an industry where margins and schedules are thin, drag is expensive. There's also the partner network ripple. Boeing doesn't operate alone. It's embedded in a lattice of suppliers, integrators, and service providers. Attackers understand this and often comb through exfiltrated data for leverage upstream and downstream. A forgotten vendor account, a shared jump host, a static credential, and a provisioning script. This is where leaked audit and provisioning files cause heartburn. Yes, the headlines are about Boeing, but the day 2 and day 3 calls are with partners. Rotate keys, deprecate long-lived tokens, close shared tunnels, change service account passwords, and confirm that the same Citrix exposure doesn't exist in a supplier's environment. In the 2020s, one company's incident becomes everyone's tabletop. Financially, high 6- to 9-figure incident costs aren't unusual for global manufacturers. Even without paying a ransom, the bill includes incident response retainers, legal counsel, regulator engagement, customer notification programs, and hardening initiatives that pull engineers off roadmaps. Add reputational costs, investor questions, procurement caution signals, and a temporary discount on trust, and you're easily into the tens of millions. The $200 million ransom demand becomes a symbolic yardstick that analysts and insurers use, fairly or not, to gauge what could have been. It also inserts Boeing's incident into the policy debates about outlawing ransom payments, insurability of extortion, and the unintended consequences of either. On the public safety axis, statements emphasizing that flight safety was not affected are both accurate and insufficient. Accurate, because well-designed aviation systems isolate flight controls, avionics software baselines, and safety-critical processes from commercial business systems. Insufficient because supply chains don't just move parts, they move compliance artifacts. If an airline's ability to prove the provenance, maintenance history, and documentation for a component is called into question, the operational response is conservative by design. That means inspections, paperwork audits, and on some edges, delays. The Boeing incident tests the resilience of that paper trail. The sector passes the test, but the stress test is a warning. There's a regulatory tail too. For a global company, breach notification isn't a single letter. It's a mosaic of state, federal, and international regimes. Each has timelines, definitions of personal information, and expectations for reasonable security. If any employee or contractor data is caught in the blast radius, privacy laws kick in. If any defense-related data is implicated, separate reporting obligations may apply. Even if the exposed datasets are mostly system logs and backups without directly sensitive personal data, the forensics to prove what was and wasn't accessed take months. That is not money spent building airplanes. It's money spent proving that the attackers didn't get something worse. And then there's the meta impact, copycat pressure. When a high-profile brand refuses to pay, or even if negotiations stall, and data nonetheless appears on a leak site, it feeds the extortion economy's marketing machine. Affiliates sell success stories to recruit new talent. They use the stolen file listings as bait in targeted phishing. As you know from the recent incident, please verify your portal credentials. The Boeing case becomes a talking point in ransomware forums. That's why community advisories tied to these incidents matter. They starve the extortioners of mystery. When defenders say clearly, here's the CVE, here are the IOCs, here's the TTP, you convert drama into patch tickets. It's not glamorous, but it's how you deflate a crime wave. The first trend, the edge is the beachhead. Ransomware affiliates aren't giving up on phishing and unpatched Windows servers, but the most profitable intrusions increasingly begin at devices we deployed to make remote work and application delivery seamless. Citrix Bleed is a case study. Tomorrow it's a different CVE and a different appliance. The strategic takeaway is boring and life-saving. Treat your ADCs, gateways, and load balancers like Tier 0 assets. Inventory them. Patch them like domain controllers. Log them like SIEMs. And for any session handling device exposed to the internet, build muscle memory around session revocation. Because after you patch, you need to invalidate tokens. As the Boeing incident shows, if a token was stolen before the patch, you have to assume it's still valid until you slam the door. The second trend, double extortion, is table stakes. And the third act, data auctioning and multi-group recycling, is maturing. Leak sites are no longer the end of the story. Stolen data circulates in private channels, posing prolonged risk. For manufacturers, the leak of procedural data, how systems are wired, who to call at which supplier, which scripts deploy what, can be more damaging than a single database dump. Expect attackers to refine how they sift and weaponize these artifacts. Expect defenders to invest in data-centric controls, encryption at rest with strict key management, data discovery and classification to reduce unknown sensitive sprawl, and tokenization of machine credentials so a leaked script doesn't equal lateral movement. Third trend, ransom economics will keep inflating until the counter economics bite harder. The 200 million ask tied to this incident signals a future where 9-figure demands are floated as anchors against cyber insurance caps and balance sheets. Long-term, the deterrent won't come only from takedowns. It will come from driving down affiliate ROI, better hardening of edge devices, relentless credential hygiene, faster detection of unusual egress patterns, and less negotiability around paying. Companies will formalize ransom decision frameworks in advance, executive-level playbooks that balance legal, ethical, and operational considerations. So the first time a big number shows up, the organization isn't improvising under duress. Fourth trend, collaboration works when it's concrete. The post-incident advisory cycle associated with this breach, where a major victim's experience seeded a government-issued, indicator-rich alert, is the blueprint. Expect more of this. Expect sector-specific ISACs inserts to ask bluntly for artifact donations, PCAP snippets, appliance logs, command and control domains, and hashes. Expect more rapid TLP-cleared sharing among peer manufacturers, because when one supplier gets burned, the rest are already smoking. And expect tabletop exercises to expand from malware in the plant network to two-edge appliance token theft followed by data exfil to cloud storage, because that's the shape of the threat right now. Finally, culture. The Boeing incident is another reminder that public statements like "no impact to flight safety" are necessary but incomplete communication. Stakeholders, customers, regulators, employees need two truths at once: that safety systems are segregated and that supply chain systems are critical too. The companies that earn long-term trust will be the ones that can talk publicly about segmentation architecture, about why a compromise stayed where it did, about how they validated integrity and not just availability. That doesn't mean exposing sensitive details. It means speaking in the grammar of modern risk. The audience has learned they can handle precision. In the end, the Boeing ransomware incident is neither an apocalypse nor a footnote. It's a real-world case study of how a world-class manufacturer, with serious segmentation and a hardened culture of safety, can still be hurt at the business edges by a franchise of cyber criminals that learn to love the gateway. It proves again that availability, Confidentiality and integrity don't fail in the same way at the same time. You can keep planes flying while still bleeding institutional knowledge through an exfiltration funnel. You can keep safety systems clean while spending months proving to auditors and partners that the parts pipeline remains intact. And you can do everything right enough and still discover that a single unpatched device at the perimeter was a quiet invitation to trouble. If you are listening from an operations center, you already know what has to happen next. Make a list of every edge device you own and treat that list like a crown jewels inventory. If a patch drops with words like session hijack, you don't just update, you revoke sessions. Change service account credentials bound to that device and run queries for the telltale strings that, in hindsight, mark the intruder's footprints. If you're on the governance side, don't wait for a ransom banner to think about your decision tree. Build and rehearse your ransom response framework when the network is quiet. So if a 9-figure number appears on Tor tomorrow, you aren't playing ethics and law on hard mode. For the rest of us in the ecosystem, suppliers, integrators, customers, assume that your partner's incidents are your own rehearsals. If Boeing's distribution environment can be targeted, your portal can too. Go rotate those keys, kill those legacy tokens, collapse those unnecessary tunnels. When an advisory lands seeded by a victim sacrifice, act like the second victim it was published to save. The room tone settles. The red banner is gone, replaced by a stack of after-action reports and a docket of remediation tickets. Somewhere an affiliate posts a victory lap. Somewhere else a defender writes a detection rule for the next Citrix bleed. That's the rhythm of our field. Harm and countermeasure, breach and blueprint. The Boeing incident adds one more chapter to the manual we're all writing together. Read it carefully, then close the manual, patch the gateway, and revoke the sessions. Tomorrow's timer is already counting down.